Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The enchanted quill on Hermione Granger's desk scratched furiously, attempting to keep pace with the influx of incident reports. As head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, her mornings often began with a chaotic symphony of urgent owls, crackling flu messages, and the relentless rustle of parchment. Today, however, a particular report caught her attention, its language unusually terse, hinting at something deeply unsettling. It was from a ministry liaison assigned to Muggle wizarding relations, detailing a seemingly innocuous event in central London. A minor squabble between two wizards in Diagon Alley's bustling entrance, quickly resolved by a standard stunner, Stupefy, from an Auror. But the report continued, dryly stating that the target, instead of being stunned, had inexplicably transformed into a flock of brightly colored canaries, which then flew off towards Trafalgar Square. Hermione frowned, pushing her spectacles higher up her nose. Canaries? A stunner wasn't meant to do that. Unusual magical residue detected, the report concluded, consistent with transfiguration, yet the caster insists on Stupefy. The next incident was equally perplexing. A group of ministry workers, attempting to levitate a fallen statue in Hyde Park with a collective levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa, found their efforts resulting in the statue not lifting, but instead shrinking to the size of a thimble, while simultaneously growing delicate, iridescent wings. A thimble-sized, winged statue of Queen Victoria now presumably resided somewhere in the depths of Hyde Park. These weren't isolated incidents. Another report detailed a wizard attempting to mend a broken teacup with a Reparo charm, only for the teacup to begin incessantly singing a Muggle sea shanty. A protective ward, Protego, cast by a concerned parent to shield their child from a stray bludger at a minor Quidditch match resulted in the child briefly gaining the ability to breathe fire. The reports piled up, each more bizarre than the last, all describing ordinary spells producing wildly distorted effects. Hermione leaned back, rubbing her temples. This wasn't standard magical backlash, nor was it amateur miscasting. The consistency of the inconsistency bothered her. It felt deliberate, as if the very fabric of magic was being rewritten, spell by spell. She grabbed the first report and headed for the Flu Network. A swirl of emerald flames deposited Hermione in a quiet London alleyway, surprisingly close to the initial incident. The air still hummed with a faint, almost imperceptible magical distortion, a strange, crackling energy that felt subtly wrong. Auror Dawlish, looking even more disheveled than usual, met her with a grim expression. "Head Granger, glad you're here. This is peculiar. The locals are starting to talk." He gestured towards the wall where the first incident had occurred. There was no visible damage, but the bricks seemed to absorb the light oddly, almost vibrating with an invisible hum. "We've tried standard counterspells, even a few obscure ones, but nothing seems to clear the residue. It just shifts." Hermione walked closer, her wand out, performing a series of diagnostic charms. Her wand tip glowed faintly, then pulsed erratically, mirroring the instability in the air. The usual vibrant hues of a successful spell detection were muted, distorted. The magical signature wasn't just unusual, it was fundamentally warped. It felt like looking at a reflection in Funhouse mirror, familiar, yet utterly twisted. "The initial spell was a simple stunner, you said?" Hermione asked, her voice low. "Yes, ma'am. Auror Peterson, highly competent. He swore it was a textbook Stupefy. He even demonstrated it for me afterward, perfectly normal. But here, well, you saw the report." Dawlish ran a hand over his thinning hair. "And the bloke, the one who turned into canaries? He's still a bit ruffled, but back to normal now. Took a few counter-transfiguration charms from the DMLE medics, but it was like pulling teeth." Hermione knelt, pressing her palm against the brick. The strange hum intensified, resonating deep within her bones. It wasn't just transfiguration magic, or a silencing charm, or even a levitation spell. It was as if the intention of the spell was being fundamentally twisted before it could manifest. The magical energy itself was being rerouted, repurposed against the caster's will. "Are there any witnesses who saw anything unusual before the spells were cast?" Hermione asked, standing up. Anything at all out of the ordinary, beyond the general oddness of a wizarding incident in a Muggle area? Dawlish brightened slightly. Ah, yes, actually. We have a few statements. A Muggle street vendor, selling roasted chestnuts nearby, mentioned seeing a peculiar fellow just before the first incident. Said he was wearing a very heavy cloak for the weather and kept fidgeting with something around his neck. Hermione's eyes narrowed. Fidgeting with what? A weird, shiny amulet. That's what the vendor called it, Dawlish recounted. Said it seemed to shimmer with odd colors, almost like oil on water. And then, he said, the air around the fellow wobbled, just as the Auror cast his spell. Another witness, an elderly witch who ran a small, discreet magical supplies shop hidden in the alley, corroborated parts of the story. She hadn't seen the man's face clearly, but she too noted the strange shimmer in the air and a faint, almost subliminal buzzing sensation, right before the stunner went awry. She described the amulet as ancient-looking, with strange symbols etched into its surface. And these symbols? Hermione pressed, her mind already racing through arcane texts she'd encountered. She couldn't quite make them out, Dawlish admitted. Said they looked like old carvings, not like anything she'd seen in modern runic script, more primitive. But she was quite insistent that the man was fiddling with it, almost adjusting it, right before the chaos. Hermione's wand pulsed once more, a faint, disturbed thrum against her palm. An amulet. Strange symbols. Distorted magic. This wasn't some random magical anomaly. This was deliberate, and the mention of primitive runic script sent a shiver down her spine. Such ancient magic was often the most powerful and the most unpredictable. This was no ordinary dark object. This felt like something far older, far more dangerous. Her investigation had just begun. The Ministry of Magic archives were a labyrinth of dimly lit shelves, stretching into dusty infinity. Rows upon rows of tightly packed scrolls, ancient tomes, and meticulously labeled files loomed over Hermione as she navigated the narrow aisles. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment, forgotten spells, and the faint, unsettling hum of residual magic from centuries past. Hermione, however, found comfort in the quiet order of it all, a familiar sanctuary amidst the chaos she'd left behind in her department. She began her search methodically, focusing on keywords: spell distortion, unintended magical effects, transfiguration anomalies, runic interference, and the more ominous magic gone awry. Hours blurred into a timeless pursuit. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through high, grimy windows as Hermione pulled out one ancient text after another, her fingers tracing faded ink and forgotten glyphs. Most records spoke of miscastings, accidental magic, or the occasional dark curse that had gone wrong, but none quite fit the pattern she was seeing. Then, tucked away in a brittle, leather-bound register titled Unexplained Magical Incidents, 17th Century, she found it. A series of entries from the 1680s detailed bizarre occurrences in Muggle villages bordering magical communities. A charm meant to light a fire had caused crops to wither. A simple scourgify had turned a house pet into a living, sentient shadow. The descriptions were eerily similar. The spell's intent was utterly twisted. Magical energy seemed to divert its purpose. Further down the page, a marginal note, barely legible, caught her eye. It read, "Possible correlation with the Fractured Rune incidents. Refer to restricted texts, Section 7, subsection Rho." The ink was faded, the handwriting ancient, but the reference to Fractured Rune made Hermione's heart quicken. It wasn't a common term. Her instincts screamed she was on the right track. Navigating the Ministry's bureaucracy to gain access to restricted Section 7, subsection Rho, was a task in itself, but Hermione's reputation as head of the DMLE, combined with her known academic prowess, eventually opened the doors. The section was overseen by a wizened, perpetually grumpy wizard named Professor Eldrin Vance, a renowned expert in ancient runes and forgotten languages. He sported spectacles even thicker than Hermione's own, and his robes were perpetually stained with ink and ancient dust. Vance grumbled as Hermione presented her case, laying out the recent incident reports alongside the obscure archival findings. He listened, stroking his long, gray beard, his eyes narrowing behind his lenses. Canaries from a stunner, eh? A singing teacup? And a self-shrinking winged statue? Vance finally scoffed, but there was a flicker of genuine intrigue in his eyes. This isn't merely a backfired spell, young Granger. This is an insult to magical causality. The very essence of the charm is being rerouted. Hermione pushed the phrase Fractured Rune across the desk. This was mentioned in an old incident report. It led me to your section. Vance's expression hardened. Ah yes, the Fractured Rune. Few still speak of it. It pertains to a very specific and highly illegal branch of runic magic. Not your everyday protections or enchantments. This is about metamagic, the manipulation of magic itself, rather than its direct application. He tapped a gnarled finger on one of Hermione's reports. Your description of the weird, shiny amulet with primitive symbols, that confirms my suspicions. Professor Vance retreated into his cluttered office, emerging moments later with a heavy, lead-lined box. He placed it carefully on the desk, the air around it shimmering faintly. With a complex series of unlocking charms and a muttered incantation, he revealed a single, tarnished leather-bound manuscript. Its pages were brittle, covered in archaic runes that seemed to writhe on the page. This, Vance announced, his voice hushed, is one of the last remaining direct accounts of the artifact of distortion, or as it was more commonly known among those who feared it, the Echo Amulet. Hermione leaned forward, her heart pounding. Echo Amulet. The name itself felt ominous. It wasn't merely an amulet, you see, Vance explained, tracing a finger over a diagram of a complex, multifaceted device depicted on a page. It was a system, a network of lesser amulets, like the one your witness described, all connected to a central, more powerful artifact. They were designed to intercept magical energy in a localized area and then divert it, twist its intended effect into something entirely different, often chaotic or absurd. He explained that the artifact was built using an extremely ancient form of runic magic, predating much of modern spellcraft. Standard counterspells, even powerful ones, wouldn't work because they rely on understanding the structure of the spell being countered. But the Echo Amulet doesn't counter a spell. It reroutes its fundamental magical intent. It's like trying to fix a broken pipe by simply changing the water pressure. The water is still going somewhere it shouldn't. The manuscript detailed the creation and subsequent prohibition of the Echo Amulet. It was designed by a secretive, ancient order, but its use quickly spiraled out of control. The ministry of the time had gone to extreme lengths to track down and supposedly destroy every piece, erasing nearly all mention of it from public records. But here we are again, Vance sighed, his gaze fixed on the manuscript. If even one of these lesser amulets has resurfaced, it means someone has found a way to reactivate it, or perhaps found a hidden cache. This is far more serious than a few singing teacups, Hermione. This artifact could undermine the very predictability of magic. Imagine a healer casting a healing spell that causes a new ailment, or an aura's shield charm that turns into a confringo. Chaos. Pure and simple chaos. Hermione stared at the intricate diagrams, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a case. It was a threat to the foundation of their magical world. And the fact that it was connected to an ancient, forgotten order made her next step clear. She needed to find out who had resurrected this dangerous relic and why. The search for the artifact, and the people behind it, had just begun. Hermione knew that an artifact as rare and dangerous as the Echo Amulet wouldn't simply appear on the open market. Its reappearance suggested a clandestine network, a shadowy figure dabbling in forbidden magic. Armed with Professor Vance's insights and the limited archival mentions of the Fractured Rune incidents, Hermione turned her attention to the Ministry's network of informants. These were often unsavory characters, but invaluable in the murky underworld of magical artifacts. She summoned Elara Thorne, a notoriously slippery but effective informant who specialized in dark artifacts and illicit trade. Elara arrived at Hermione's office under the cover of a privacy charm, her eyes constantly darting around, her movements quick and furtive. She wore an unnecessarily dramatic velvet cloak, despite the mild weather. "What's so urgent, Head Granger?" "My time is precious, you know," Elara purred, her voice raspy. Hermione bypassed pleasantries. "I'm looking for information on a specific type of artifact. Ancient runic, designed to distort spell effects. Sometimes called the Echo Amulet." Elara's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear crossing her usually guarded features. "The Echo Amulet? That's deep, even for my contacts. Most wouldn't touch it. Too much bad history." She paused, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I did hear whispers. A name. A new player in the old game. They call him Silas Vane." "Silas Vane?" Hermione repeated, her brow furrowed. The name wasn't familiar to her. "Yes. A reclusive type. Deals only in the rarest, most dangerous items. Rumor has it he recently acquired something unusual, that's been causing unforeseen complications for buyers. Sounds like your distorted spells, doesn't it? Alara gave a wry, unsettling smile. He operates out of Nocturne Alley mostly. Has a small, private shop. But he's well guarded and very, very paranoid. Hermione thanked Alara, dismissing her with a flash of galleons. Silas Vane. The name resonated with a cold certainty. This was her first solid lead, pointing directly into the heart of London's magical underbelly. Nocturne Alley was a stark contrast to the vibrant, bustling Diagon Alley. Here, the air was perpetually dim, even in daylight, heavy with the scent of damp stone, decay, and strange, unsettling potions. Shady figures huddled in doorways, their faces obscured by deep hoods. Shops displayed gruesome items, shrunken heads, shriveled hands, cursed jewelry, and ingredients that whispered dark promises. The very cobblestones seemed to hum with illicit magic. Hermione, disguised with a simple disillusionment charm and a plain cloak, moved through the throng, her wand held loosely in her hand, ready at a moment's notice. Her senses were on high alert, absorbing every detail. She felt the subtle pulses of dark magic radiating from various storefronts, the furtive glances of dealers, the hushed bartering over sinister objects. It was a place where caution was a survival instinct. Finding Silas Vane's shop wasn't easy. It was tucked away down a particularly narrow, unlit side alley, barely distinguishable from the crumbling walls around it. There was no sign, just a single, uninviting wooden door carved with unsettling, intertwining serpents. Hermione paused, feeling the heavy, oppressive wards radiating from within. They weren't just standard protective charms, they felt ancient, almost hungry. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. This wasn't a formal ministry raid, it was a reconnaissance mission. She needed to confirm Vane's connection to the Echo Amulet and, if possible, get a closer look. Hermione pushed open the heavy door, stepping into a small, cluttered shop. Dust motes danced in the gloom, illuminated by the faint glow of arcane artifacts on the shelves. Skulls with glowing eyes stared from shadowed corners, and strange, whispering winds seemed to coil around her ankles. Silas Vane was exactly as Alara described, thin, reclusive, with sharp, bird-like eyes that darted nervously. He was hunched over a counter, polishing a grotesque silver claw. "Can I help you?" Vane's voice was a dry rasp, devoid of any warmth. "I'm looking for something unique," Hermione began, trying to sound suitably mysterious. "Something that deals with spell redirection." Vane's eyes flickered, a hint of suspicion in their depths. "We have many items that redirect, deflect, disrupt. What precisely are you seeking?" "An Echo Amulet," Hermione stated, watching his reaction closely. The effect was immediate. Vane froze, the silver claw clattering to the counter. His face, already pale, turned ashen. "You speak of forbidden things, stranger," Vane hissed, his hand subtly moving towards something beneath the counter. "Such items do not exist." "They exist," Hermione countered, her voice firm. "And I believe you have one, or know where to find one." Just then, a faint, almost imperceptible humming began to emanate from a display case behind Vane. It was the same subtle buzz Hermione had detected at the London incident site. Vane's eyes widened in alarm. You brought it here?" he stammered, looking at Hermione with a mixture of fear and accusation. Before Hermione could fully react, the humming intensified. A small, dark object, no bigger than her thumb, levitated from the display case. It was indeed an amulet, dull and unassuming at first glance, but as it turned in the air, a faint, swirling shimmer of distorted colors, like oil on water, became visible. It was the Echo Amulet, or at least one of the lesser, fragmented pieces. Suddenly, the shop door burst open, revealing two cloaked figures. They moved with a silent, fluid grace that spoke of practiced stealth. They weren't here for Vane. Their eyes, visible beneath their hoods, were fixed on the levitating amulet, and then on Hermione. One of them immediately raised a wand, but the other, larger figure, made a sharp, almost imperceptible gesture towards the amulet. The hum intensified, vibrating through Hermione's teeth. The very air seemed to crackle with uncontrolled magic. She felt her own wand arm tingle with a strange, repellent force. These weren't just common dark wizards. Their knowledge of the amulet, their swift reaction, implied a deeper connection. As they stepped fully into the dim light, Hermione saw a faint, almost faded symbol etched onto the clasp of the larger figure's cloak. It was a stylized fractured rune, identical to the obscure marginal note she had found in the Ministry archives. The Order of the Fractured Rune. Her presence here had not only confirmed the existence of the amulet, but also led her directly to its keepers. This was no simple black market deal. This was a direct confrontation with the ancient order that Professor Vance had spoken of. The game had just changed. Hermione barely escaped Nocturne Alley, leaving a terrified Silas Vane to whatever fate awaited him with the mysterious cloaked figures. Her encounter had confirmed her gravest suspicions. The Echo Amulet was in the hands of an organized group, and the symbol she'd glimpsed, the Fractured Rune, pointed directly to an ancient, supposedly defunct order. This wasn't just about controlling a rogue artifact. It was about understanding a forgotten ideology. There was only one place in the wizarding world that held the deepest, most arcane secrets of magic, beyond the Ministry's sometimes selective archives, the Hogwarts Library. Its restricted section, overseen by the unflappable Madame Pants, contained knowledge long deemed too dangerous or obscure for general consumption. After a quick flute trip, Hermione found herself striding purposefully through the familiar, hallowed halls of Hogwarts. The castle hummed with a different kind of magic, a comforting, familiar warmth compared to the unsettling chill of the Ministry and the grime of Nocturne Alley. She headed straight for the headmistress's office. Minerva McGonagall, still as sharp and formidable as ever, looked up from a stack of parchments as Hermione entered. "Hermione, dear, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Ministry business, I presume, given your rather disheveled appearance?" Minerva's eyes, though shrewd, held a flicker of concern. Hermione wasted no time. "Headmistress, I need access to the most obscure texts on ancient runic magic, specifically anything related to fractured runes or artifacts that manipulate spell intent, and anything on secret magical orders that operated around the 17th century." Minerva's eyebrows rose. "That sounds like a rather specific and potentially dangerous line of inquiry. What precisely has the Department of Magical Law Enforcement stumbled upon now?" Hermione quickly, but concisely, explained the incidents of distorted spells, the discovery of the Echo Amulet, and her confrontation in Nocturne Alley. She described the fractured rune symbol she saw on the cloaked figure. Minerva listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grave. "The Echo Amulet," Minerva murmured, a rare note of deep concern in her voice. "A relic of a troubling era. And the fractured rune. I had hoped that order had faded into complete obscurity. Come, Hermione. This is not a matter for Madame Pants alone. This requires my direct involvement." Minerva led Hermione not to the restricted section directly, but to a hidden, even more secluded annex beneath her office, accessible only by a complex series of password-protected charms and a very specific sequence of wand movements. This was where Hogwarts kept its most profoundly dangerous or ethically sensitive volumes. The air here was even older, thicker, imbued with the weight of forgotten knowledge. "The Order of the Fractured Rune," Minerva began, pulling down a heavy, dark green tome bound in what felt like dragon hide, was not an inherently dark order in the traditional sense, at least not at its inception. They were founded on a radical, and some would say dangerous, philosophical premise, the idea of magical ethics beyond simple law. Hermione frowned. "Magical ethics?" "Precisely," Minerva continued, opening the tome to reveal intricate diagrams and dense, archaic script. They believed that magic, left unchecked, was inherently chaotic and prone to misuse, even by well-intentioned wizards. Their core tenet was that magic should be balanced, harmonized, and even corrected if it deviated from a perceived ethical path. They saw themselves as the ultimate arbiters of magical morality, not just through laws, but through the very fabric of spellcasting. So they created artifacts to enforce their version of balance. Hermione guessed, a chilling thought forming in her mind. "Indeed," Minerva confirmed. "The Echo Amulet was their most infamous creation. It wasn't designed for offensive purposes, not initially. It was intended to correct spells that they deemed unethical or disruptive to their envisioned magical harmony. For example, a charm cast with malicious intent might be fractured into something benign or even absurd. A transfiguration spell used for frivolous gain might backfire humorously. They called it corrective distortion." Hermione felt a cold dread. "But that's interfering with fundamental magical principles. Who decides what's ethical? And what happens when their idea of balance becomes unbalanced itself?" "Precisely the problem," Minerva said, her voice grim. Their corrective distortion quickly spiraled into unpredictable chaos. It wasn't long before protective charms caused harm, and healing spells created illness, simply because the Order's definition of ethical was arbitrary and often extreme. The Echo Amulet became a weapon of indiscriminate chaos, turning magic against itself. The Ministry of the Time deemed them too dangerous, and the Order was systematically dismantled. Their artifacts were believed to be destroyed. Hermione carefully studied the diagrams in the tome. The Echo Amulet was described in terrifying detail, its runic matrix, its ability to intercept magical intent, and its fracturing of spell effects. It was built using a combination of ancient Norse runes and a very specific, almost lost form of Egyptian hieroglyphic magic, which together formed its unique distortion field. Minerva then pointed to a faded illustration on one of the final pages. It was an image of the Order's official insignia, a highly stylized fractured rune, depicted as a jagged, broken circle with radiating lines, almost like a shattered clock face. "This is the mark you saw?" Minerva asked. "Yes," Hermione confirmed, a sense of grim satisfaction mingled with growing apprehension. "It was on the clasp of the cloaked figure's garment." "Then the Order of the Fractured Rune has indeed resurfaced," Minerva stated, her face serious. "And if they are reactivating their Echo Amulets, their intentions cannot be benign. Their historical aim was never mere chaos for chaos's sake, but rather control. They sought to dictate the very nature of magic, to enforce their vision of a balanced magical society through radical means." Hermione continued to pore over the text, searching for any clue about the Order's current whereabouts or methods. Then, near the bottom of the page detailing the Order's insignia, she noticed another, almost imperceptible symbol embedded within the Fractured Rune. A tiny, almost hidden star-shaped glyph, usually associated with astrological charts of celestial alignments. It wasn't a common rune, but she recognized it from her own extensive historical studies. "Headmistress," Hermione said, pointing to the glyph. "This star. It's often linked to specific celestial events or geographical alignments." Minerva leaned closer, her eyes widening slightly. "Indeed, a very subtle detail. It suggests their strong belief in cosmic influences on magical flow, and it often points to places where such alignments are most potent." She looked at Hermione, a new line of inquiry forming in her mind. "A new thread, then, Hermione. An astrological signature. It might not lead to a hidden base, but perhaps to a specific date for a significant ritual, or even a location where such energies are amplified." The realization hit Hermione. The Order wasn't just randomly unleashing chaos. They were methodical. They were working towards something, a grand plan, likely tied to their twisted concept of magical balance. Finding that star-shaped glyph, that tiny, almost invisible clue, felt like finally grasping the true direction of a complex current. Her investigation had deepened considerably, transitioning from tracking an artifact to uncovering the motives of an ancient, dangerous cult. Hermione spent the next few days immersed in ancient star charts and forgotten astrological lore, cross-referencing them with historical records of the Order of the Fractured Rune. Minerva provided invaluable assistance, pulling dusty astronomical tables from the deepest recesses of the Hogwarts library. The tiny, star-shaped glyph she'd seen on the Order's insignia, embedded within the Fractured Rune, was indeed a specific astrological marker. It pointed to a rare alignment that had occurred recently, precisely coinciding with the initial incidents of spell distortion in London. More critically, it also hinted at locations where such cosmic energies were believed to converge. One such location was a seemingly innocuous, disused old warehouse near the Thames, on the outskirts of London. According to ancient texts, it stood on a ley line intersection, a place where magical energies naturally intensified under specific celestial conditions. It was the kind of place a group obsessed with balancing magic through metamagic would choose for their operations. Hermione moved with extreme caution. She didn't alert the Ministry's main aura force, knowing the delicate nature of the artifact and the Order's ability to manipulate magic. This required a precise, surgical approach, not a full-scale assault. She arrived under the cloak of a moonless night, the Thames flowing silently beside the grimy brick building. The air here was heavy, thick with a palpable magical presence that felt both ancient and potent. It was similar to the hum she'd felt in Nocturne Alley, but far more concentrated. As she approached the warehouse, a faint, rhythmic thrumming became audible, resonating from within. It was the same unsettling buzz from the amulet, amplified. Hermione felt a prickle of dread, but also a surge of determination. She was close, very close. The thrumming grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet, a powerful, rhythmic pulse that indicated the core artifact was active, possibly even being used or prepared for a larger ritual. She carefully bypassed the perimeter wards, her own defensive charms shimmering invisibly around her. The door was old, rusted, but magically sealed with complex runic protections that confirmed her suspicions. These weren't simple dark wizards. These were masters of ancient, forbidden lore. She managed to subtly disarm the outer ward with a precise countercharm, a silent pulse of magic that barely disturbed the night air. As the last magical barrier dissolved, the thrumming from inside intensified, almost beckoning her. She pushed the heavy door open, revealing a cavernous, dimly lit interior. The warehouse was vast and surprisingly empty, save for a raised platform in the center. On it, nestled amongst arcane instruments and flickering runic diagrams, sat a larger, more ornate version of the Echo Amulet. It wasn't dull and unassuming like the fragmented one in Nocturne Alley. This was the heart of the artifact, glowing with a faint, malevolent light, its facets subtly shifting. It was mesmerizing, terrifying. But before Hermione could take another step, the shadows around her seemed to coalesce. With a chilling accuracy that spoke of meticulous planning, two cloaked figures, the same ones from Nocturne Alley, emerged from the darkness. They were fast, silent, and clearly expecting her. "We knew you'd come, Head Granger," a low, raspy voice echoed from one of the figures. It was the larger one, likely the leader. The Ministry always sends its brightest to poke into what doesn't concern them. "This concerns everyone," Hermione retorted, her wand already raised, pointing directly at the central artifact. "You're unleashing chaos." "We are restoring balance," the second figure hissed, raising their wand. "A balance that your civilized magic has long forgotten." Suddenly, both figures launched a volley of spells. Hermione reacted instantly, casting a powerful Protego shield charm. But as the familiar golden light flared, it twisted, contorted, and instead of forming a defensive barrier, it imploded inwards, wrapping around her like an invisible, suffocating shroud. It wasn't a harmful effect, but utterly disorienting, muffling sound and distorting light. "What in Merlin's beard?" she gasped, struggling against the unexpected magic. The Echo Amulet's influence was potent here, actively warping even her own protective spells. "Your magic is predictable, Granger," the leader sneered, launching a stunner. Hermione braced herself, but instead of impact, a shower of vibrant, non-lethal sparks erupted around her, tickling her face like confetti. It was startling, but harmless. She tried a disarming charm, Expelliarmus. The familiar red jet of light shot forth, but it arced wildly, transforming into a torrent of live butterflies that harmlessly fluttered around the cloaked figures. They chuckled, unfazed. Hermione's mind raced. The amulet wasn't just deflecting or blocking spells, it was reinterpreting their magical intent. A Protego, meant to protect, became an inward shroud, a form of protection that isolated. A stunner, meant to incapacitate, became harmless sparks, a distraction perhaps? An Expelliarmus, meant to disarm, became butterflies, a release of objects from control. This was a twisted logic, a perversion of magical causality, based on distorted runic interpretations. Panic threatened to rise, but Hermione pushed it down. She couldn't fight magic that twisted itself. She needed to adapt. Her years of logical thinking and deep runic study kicked in. If the amulet warped spells based on their underlying intent, then she needed to cast spells whose intended outcome was so specific, so undeniable, that the amulet couldn't easily reroute it into something harmless or absurd. Or better yet, find a spell whose twisted result would still be useful. "They won't just stand there and be hit by butterflies," Hermione muttered to herself, darting behind a stack of old crates. The two figures were moving, trying to flank her. She needed to create a diversion, a way to gain precious seconds to escape and formulate a proper counter-strategy. A simple blasting curse, Confringo, would likely turn into a puff of smoke or a harmless giggle. A knockback jinx, Depulso, might make them float gently to the ceiling. Then it clicked. The amulet interpreted spells based on runic principles. If she wanted to disorient them, she couldn't simply try to disarm or stun. She needed to cast something that, when distorted, would still achieve her goal of making them lose track of her. She aimed her wand at a precarious stack of barrels. "Bombarda Maxima," she roared, channeling every ounce of her frustration and focus. The powerful blasting charm shot forward. For a terrifying moment, she thought it might turn into a bubblegum pop. But instead, the barrels didn't explode outwards. They exploded inwards, collapsing into a dense, compacted cube of wood with an ear-splitting implosion sound that echoed through the vast warehouse. The force of the implosion, though localized, created a powerful concussive wave that wasn't about blasting, but about collapsing. It threw the cloaked figures off balance, sending them sprawling. The amulet's interpretation of explosion was implosion, and its secondary effect, the shockwave, still worked in her favor. Taking advantage of their momentary disorientation, Hermione didn't try another direct attack. Instead, she aimed her wand at the ancient stone floor beneath her. "Tergio," she whispered, a cleaning charm. She wasn't trying to clean. She was hoping its purifying intent, when warped, would have an interesting effect. Instead of cleaning, the floor beneath her feet liquefied into a pool of bubbling, iridescent mud, which then solidified instantly around her boots, trapping her. It was a momentary self-trap, but before the cloaked figures could recover, she quickly reversed her intent, channeling a subtle freeing charm, and pulled her feet free just as they began to stir. The implosion had bought her time. The liquidifying floor had bought her a momentary shield as they tried to traverse it. Hermione realized the key. She couldn't fight the distortion, but she could predict its logic. The amulet twisted magic based on its runic core, often into its literal or opposite interpretation of the spell's effect. With this crucial insight, Hermione didn't try to vanish or run. She aimed her wand at the metal roof high above them. "Reductio," she bellowed, the shrinking charm. Her intent, make the large roof small. The amulet's distortion, likely the opposite. With a deafening groan of tortured metal, the massive sections of the roof began to expand rapidly, stretching and bending, tearing free from their moorings with groaning shrieks. Huge sheets of corrugated iron ripped away, crashing down between her and the cloaked figures, showering them with dust and debris. The noise was deafening, the chaos absolute. "She's escaping," the leader roared, struggling to avoid the falling metal. Hermione didn't wait. With the chaos as her cover, she spun around and blasted the newly disarmed outer door with a simple, intent-driven blasting charm, Reducto. She knew the amulet would try to twist it, but destroying a door might simply make it disappear, or reappear somewhere else. To her relief, the Reducto didn't cause an implosion or a shower of butterflies. Instead, the door simply vanished from its hinges, leaving a gaping hole. The amulet had interpreted reduced to nothing as removed from existence. Perfect! She fled into the cold night, leaving the disoriented figures struggling in the wreckage of the expanding warehouse. She hadn't retrieved the artifact, but she had gained something far more valuable, a terrifying, yet crucial, understanding of how the Echo Amulet warped magic. She now knew its twisted logic, and with that knowledge, she might stand a chance. Hermione returned to the Ministry, exhausted but invigorated by her newfound understanding of the Echo Amulet's twisted logic. Her confrontation in the warehouse, though dangerous, had been a crucial lesson. The Order of the Fractured Rune wasn't simply chaotic. They operated with a perverse, inverse logic, and that logic could be exploited. Her next step was to use the specific astrological alignment data she and Minerva had uncovered. The star-shaped glyph on the Order's insignia, when combined with historical records of their movements and known ley lines, pointed to several potential sites. The warehouse had been won. Now, with her deeper understanding of the amulet's power, specifically the central, larger artifact and its role in coordinating the smaller ones, Hermione focused on locations where massive, sustained magical energy could be harnessed or amplified. Her research led her to an ancient, derelict building in the heart of London, nestled inconspicuously between two modern Muggle skyscrapers. It was a forgotten structure, seemingly untouched by time, its grimy facade hinting at centuries of neglect. Official Muggle records listed it as a condemned warehouse, awaiting demolition, but Hermione felt a prickle of ancient magic radiating from its very foundations. This wasn't just on a ley line. It felt like a powerful magical nexus. Armed with new diagnostic charms designed to detect warped magical resonance, Hermione approached the building under the cover of a more robust disillusionment charm. The thrumming she'd felt at the previous site was nothing compared to the powerful, resonant hum that vibrated through her very bones here. It felt like standing next to a colossal, unseen engine of pure magic. She meticulously searched the perimeter, her wand glowing with detection spells. The standard entrance was magically sealed beyond anything she could casually bypass. However, an almost imperceptible shift in the aged stonework caught her eye. It wasn't a door, nor a hidden passage. It was a subtle runic distortion in the very fabric of the building, a concealment charm woven into the stone itself, designed not to hide a door, but to hide a passage that wasn't meant to exist. Remembering the Order's fascination with paradox and distorted magic, Hermione didn't try to open a door. Instead, she performed a carefully modified reversal charm, reversus, not on the charm itself, but on the intent of its concealment. If it was meant to hide a non-existent passage, reversing the intent might reveal it. With a deep thrumming groan, a section of the stone wall shimmered, turning translucent for a moment before solidifying into a narrow, dark opening. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. The passage led downwards, spiraling into the earth, the air growing colder, heavier, filled with the overwhelming thrum of power. The spiral staircase descended deep beneath the bustling streets of London, the thrumming growing into a deep, pervasive hum that vibrated through Hermione's entire body. The air grew charged, almost electric. Finally, the passage opened into a vast, cavernous chamber, carved from obsidian-like rock, shimmering with faint, ethereal light emanating from unknown sources. This was no ordinary hiding place. It felt like a sacred, forbidden vault. And in the very center of the chamber, suspended within a shimmering cage of runic energy, was the core artifact. It was far larger and more intricate than the smaller amulets she had seen. Roughly the size of a Quidditch bludger, it was a multifaceted sphere of dark, polished stone, intricately carved with thousands of intertwining ancient runes, the same fractured runes and star-shaped glyphs she had seen in the Hogwarts texts. It pulsed with an inner, malevolent light, shifting through all the colors of the spectrum, from deep violet to angry crimson. Around it, smaller, identical amulets orbited slowly, like captive moons around a dark planet. This was the source, the heart of the distortion. It was unequivocally active. The power radiating from it was immense, almost overwhelming. It wasn't just magical energy. It felt like raw, unfiltered temporal and spatial forces being constantly warped and redirected. Hermione felt a dizzying sensation, as if her own timeline was momentarily stretching and compressing. The air crackled with phantom whispers, echoes of spells that had been fractured and rerouted, their original intents twisted into grotesque parodies. Around the central artifact, she saw signs of recent activity. Complex runic arrays drawn on the floor in shimmering, active lines, arcane instruments humming with suppressed energy, and small, discarded vials hinting at ritual components. The Order had been here, likely very recently, performing some kind of activation or ritual involving this powerful object. Hermione raised her wand, her mind racing. This was it, the source of all the chaos. But simply destroying it felt wrong. She could feel the sheer, volatile power contained within it. As Hermione approached the pulsating core artifact, the air grew thick with a palpable energetic resonance. It wasn't just magic, it was an unstable convergence of warped magical intent. The surrounding runic cage wasn't just containing it, it seemed to be amplifying it, funneling its power outward, ready to unleash its chaotic influence on London. She extended her wand, attempting a simple diagnostic charm, but as the spell energy reached the artifact's aura, it recoiled violently. The familiar blue light of her charm turned sickly green, then purple, before dissipating with a faint, unsettling sizzle. It was as if the artifact swallowed magical energy, digested it, and spat it out, utterly transformed. A horrifying realization dawned on her. This wasn't just a powerful dark artifact. It was a reactor of magical distortion. Professor Vance's words echoed in her mind. It's about metamagic, the manipulation of magic itself. And Minerva's, it wasn't just containing it, it was amplifying it. If she tried a powerful destructive spell, like a Confringo or a Bombarda, the amulet wouldn't simply shatter. Its very nature was to distort incoming magical energy. A destructive curse might be twisted into a massive, uncontrolled implosion, sucking the entire building, and a large chunk of London, into a catastrophic void. Or worse, it could be transformed into an unleashed wave of pure, chaotic distortion, turning every spell, every magical signature in the vicinity into an unpredictable and potentially deadly farce. The entire magical world, and likely parts of the Muggle world, would descend into utter pandemonium. It would be a magical apocalypse, triggered by her own desperate attempt to destroy it. Hermione took a step back, her heart pounding. Destroying it directly was extremely dangerous. It was like trying to put out a fire by pouring highly flammable material onto it, trusting that it would somehow turn into water. The risk was too great. She couldn't destroy it. But she also couldn't leave it active, not with the Order of the Fractured Rune clearly planning something. She needed another way. A way to neutralize it, to rewrite its function without triggering a catastrophic meltdown. It was an unprecedented challenge, one that would require not just power, but a profound understanding of the very fabric of magic. The solution lay not in destruction, but in recalibration. Hermione stood before the pulsating core artifact, the air around it thick with warped magic, her mind racing through every magical theory and principle she had ever learned. The sheer, raw power emanating from the Echo Amulet was unlike anything she had ever encountered, even during her darkest days with Harry and Ron. This wasn't just a dark object, it was a fundamental perversion of magical law. Her first instinct, the one ingrained in every Auror and Ministry official, was simple: destroy it. A powerful blasting curse, a calculated series of counterspells, anything to shatter the malevolent device and eradicate its threat. But the horrifying truth, which she had gleaned from Professor Vance's archaic texts and her own chilling experience in the warehouse, screamed otherwise. This artifact didn't just contain dangerous magic, it processed and distorted it. Attempting a direct destructive spell would be akin to throwing a handful of flu powder into a raging inferno of highly volatile potions. The energetic resonance was too immense, too unstable. Her spell wouldn't destroy the amulet, it would be interpreted by it. A confringo might not just cause an uncontrolled explosion, it could trigger an implosion of catastrophic proportions, sucking in everything within a vast radius, collapsing buildings, streets, perhaps even entire districts into a magical singularity. Or, equally terrifying, it could take the intent of destruction and unleash it as a wave of pure, unadulterated magical chaos. Every spell cast in London, every piece of enchanted equipment, every protective ward, all could instantly twist into their most perverse, harmful, or absurd opposites. Healing spells causing illness, protective charms becoming offensive weapons, a simple lumos turning a street lamp into a miniature sun. The very fabric of reality, both muggle and magical, would unravel in an instant. The thought made her stomach churn. She had almost triggered such an event with her own hasty spell in the warehouse. The Order might have been defeated, but at what cost? Millions of lives, magical and muggle, would be irrevocably altered if not ended. This was not merely a tactical decision, it was an ethical catastrophe waiting to happen. Destruction was not an option. If destruction was out, what remained? Hermione walked slowly around the shimmering cage, her eyes fixed on the pulsating artifact. Its intricate runic carvings seemed to pulse with a life of their own, twisting and intertwining. Professor Vance had mentioned that the amulet's function was rerouting its fundamental magical intent, based on ancient, complex runic principles. That's when the audacious, terrifying idea took root. If it rerouted magic, if it reinterpreted spells, could its own core function be reinterpreted? Could she rewrite its purpose? Instead of destroying it, could she neutralize it by forcing it to distort its own distortion? Could she reset its runic matrix, not by shattering it, but by compelling it to embrace a new, harmless, or even beneficial function? This wasn't simply counter-cursing. It was meta-runic engineering, attempting to alter the very foundational programming of an ancient, powerful artifact. It would involve a deep dive into the esoteric principles that the Order of the Fractured Rune itself employed, but with an inverse, corrective intent. She would need to understand the precise sequence and interaction of the ancient runes etched onto the amulet, then devise a counter-sequence, a recalibration ritual, that would force the artifact to cease its distorting function. The risks were immense. One wrong calculation, one misplaced rune, one mispronounced incantation, and the outcome could be even worse than attempting to destroy it. She could inadvertently amplify its distortion, turn it into a beacon that drew all magic to it to be twisted, or even permanently embed herself within its chaotic field, like a phantom in time and space, just as Penelope had warned Evan about. The Order had clearly failed to fully control it, despite creating it. What made her think she could? Yet, the alternative was leaving it active, allowing the Order to continue their dangerous plans, to destabilize the magical world with their twisted sense of balance. Hermione closed her eyes, the pulsating hum of the artifact filling the vast chamber. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, heavier than any physical burden. She saw the faces of those affected by the distorted spells, the wizard who became canaries, the child who breathed fire. She saw the potential chaos, the utter breakdown of their society. She also saw the faces of her friends, Harry and Ron, who always relied on her to find the logical solution, to think her way out of impossible situations. She was Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age. But this wasn't about being bright. It was about being right, about choosing the path with the least catastrophic outcome, even if it was the most difficult. Destroy it and risk untold devastation? Or attempt to recalibrate it and risk her own magical integrity and sanity, but potentially save countless others? Her training, her entire being, rebelled against the idea of not destroying something so inherently dangerous. It felt like leaving a ticking time bomb intact. But her logic, honed by years of studying complex magical theory, told her that sometimes the most direct path was the most perilous. The Order believed in controlling magic, in balancing it according to their twisted ethics. Her approach would be to unbalance their control, to break the very mechanism they used to impose their will. It wasn't about destruction, but about restoration to its natural state. It was a gamble, a massive, terrifying gamble. But it was a gamble she had to take. The thought of permanent, chaotic magic being unleashed upon the world was far worse than any personal risk. Hermione opened her eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the pulsating artifact, no longer with fear, but with fierce determination. There was only one choice. She would not destroy it. She would rewrite it. She would attempt to nullify its destructive purpose, to turn its own chaotic power against itself, making it inert, harmless, or perhaps, if she was truly audacious, even a force for good. She just needed to figure out how. Having made her terrifying choice, Hermione wasted no time. The immediate danger of the Order of the Fractured Rune finding her, or activating the Echo Amulet for their larger scheme, spurred her into action. She knew she couldn't simply improvise a ritual of this magnitude. This wasn't about casting a spell. It was about re-engineering the very core of a forbidden, ancient magical construct. She returned to Hogwarts, informing Minerva of her plan to recalibrate the artifact, not destroy it. The headmistress, though visibly concerned by the immense risk, recognized the wisdom in Hermione's reasoning. Together, they delved deeper into the restricted annex, pulling out more obscure texts on metamagic, runic theory, and even ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic enchantments, the underlying magic that Professor Vance believed powered the amulet's distortion. Hermione worked tirelessly for 2 days, fueled by strong tea and an unyielding determination. She painstakingly charted the Echo Amulet's visible runic matrix, dissecting its layers of intent and effect. The Order had built it to take the intent of a spell and fracture it into a chaotic, often opposite outcome. To reverse this, Hermione had to design a counter matrix, a recalibration sequence, that would force the amulet to interpret its own distorting function as something to be nullified. It was akin to writing a complex magical program. She combined her encyclopedic knowledge of ancient runes with cutting-edge modern arithmancy and spell theory. She theorized that if she could introduce a new, dominant runic intention, one of clarity and restoration of natural flow, at the precise moment of a unique astrological alignment, the opposite of the one the Order used for amplification, the amulet's core would be forced to reinterpret its own nature. The ritual required specific, rare components: moonstone dust for clarity, essence of a phoenix tear for purity and restoration, and a strand of ancient Egyptian linen, imbued with a preservation charm, to act as a conduit for the hieroglyphic elements of the amulet's magic. Minerva, understanding the gravity of the situation, quietly procured these for her, never questioning the need. Hermione also spent hours practicing complex wand movements, not for spellcasting, but for directing raw magical energy with pinpoint accuracy. The ritual wasn't about power, it was about precision and intent. Every etched line, every chanted syllable, every directed pulse of magic had to be perfect. She was rewriting magical history, and failure meant chaos. Under the next waning moon, Hermione returned to the hidden chamber beneath the London warehouse. The air was colder, heavier, filled with the constant thrum of the active Echo Amulet. The smaller, orbiting amulets pulsed malevolently. Hermione felt an almost physical resistance from the core artifact, as if it sensed her intrusive intent. She set up her ritual space, drawing a complex, multi-layered runic circle on the obsidian floor using the phoenix tear essence and moonstone dust. At its heart, she placed a finely etched silver stand, ready to hold the Echo Amulet. She carefully threaded the ancient linen through a series of smaller runes she had drawn, connecting them to her own wand. This wasn't a quick incantation. This was a slow, deliberate act of magical will and knowledge. Hermione began to chant, her voice low and resonant, reciting the ancient runic sequences designed to counter the amulet's distortion. With each syllable, she channeled her magic through the linen conduit, sending precise bursts of energy towards the pulsating artifact. The amulet resisted fiercely. As her magic flowed, the chamber began to shake. The smaller orbiting amulets spun wildly, their shifting colors intensifying, throwing grotesque shadows across the walls. The central artifact pulsed violently, pushing back against her recalibration efforts. Hermione felt a searing pain behind her eyes, a battle being waged directly within her mind, as the amulet tried to twist her magical intent, to break her concentration. Her own spells, her carefully channeled energy, momentarily flickered and distorted. A beam of golden light, meant to stabilize a rune, warped into a crackling bolt of green energy that narrowly missed her. She had to use all her concentration, her very mental fortitude, to keep her own magic pure, preventing it from being fractured by the amulet's immense power. It was like holding back a raging river with sheer willpower. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her arms ached, and her voice grew hoarse, but she pressed on. She envisioned the amulet's twisted code, and then, overlaid upon it, the countercode of clarity and order. She wasn't fighting it with force. She was fighting it with reason and logic, forcing its own mechanism to undo itself. There was a moment, a terrifying fraction of a second, when the hum of the amulet crescendoed into an unbearable shriek. The light from the artifact flared, blindingly white, then plunged into an inky blackness. Hermione felt a wrenching sensation, as if her very magical core was being pulled apart. She gritted her teeth, pushing through the pain, focusing on the final, critical rune sequence. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shriek cut off. The blinding light vanished. The oppressive hum in the chamber died down, replaced by an eerie silence. Hermione staggered back, her wand arm trembling, her body shaking from the sheer exertion. The central Echo Amulet, suspended in its cage, was no longer pulsating. Its shifting colors had faded. It was now a dull, gray, inert sphere, its intricate runes no longer glowing, but merely etched lifelessly into its surface. The smaller orbiting amulets fell silent, drifting slowly downwards to land with soft thuds on the stone floor. She had done it. She had successfully neutralized the artifact. Its function had been rewritten, its distorting core mechanism rendered inert. It was no longer capable of intercepting or twisting spells. It was just a heavy, strangely carved stone. Hermione collapsed onto the cold stone floor, utterly exhausted. Every muscle in her body ached, and her mind felt utterly drained, as if she had just run a marathon using only her brain. Her magic, usually a vibrant hum within her, felt like a faint, distant echo. She lay there for a long moment, simply breathing, the silence of the chamber a profound comfort after the chaotic resonance. She had faced down an ancient, forbidden magic, fought against its very essence, and emerged victorious. The magical world was safe from the current threat of rampant spell distortion. The price was immense personal strain, but the outcome was worth it. She might not have destroyed it, but she had rendered it harmless, and in doing so, had proven that understanding and wisdom could overcome brute force, even when dealing with the most dangerous of magical artifacts. The Ministry of Magic hummed with its usual frenetic energy, but to Hermione, it felt different. A quiet satisfaction settled deep within her, a calm that came from having averted a catastrophe. She sat in her office, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, ordinary, predictable dust, not shimmering with chaotic energy. The Echo Amulet, now inert, sat on a heavily warded pedestal in a secure ministry vault, a lifeless testament to its former terrifying power. Her muscles still ached, and a profound weariness clung to her, a mental fatigue far deeper than any physical exhaustion. But her mind, no longer battling the amulet's insidious influence, was clearer than it had been in weeks. She reflected on the Order of the Fractured Rune. They weren't dark wizards driven by malice or a thirst for power in the traditional sense. They were fanatics, driven by a warped ideology of magical ethics and a desperate desire to control something inherently uncontrollable, the very flow of magic. Their belief that magic needed to be balanced or corrected was, in its twisted way, a form of arrogance. They saw chaos where there was simply freedom and sought to impose order where there was natural flow. The Echo Amulet was a physical manifestation of that desire, a tool to force magic into their preconceived notions of right and wrong. It was a reminder that even the most noble intentions, when taken to extremes and coupled with forbidden knowledge, could lead to disaster. The consequences of their actions were not contained to the magical world. Muggle lives had been affected, their perception of reality momentarily shattered. It highlighted the delicate, often unseen, membrane between their two worlds. Hermione understood now why such artifacts were banned, why their very existence was almost erased from history. Not just because they were dangerous, but because they challenged the fundamental predictability of magic, making it unreliable, making the wizarding world unstable. Magic, she mused, was meant to be wielded with respect, not subjugated or dictated. Later that evening, after a much-needed shower and a fortifying meal, Hermione called Minerva McGonagall. The headmistress's face, etched with relief, appeared in the green flames. "Hermione, my dear, I've heard the news. Well done. Truly, exceptionally well done. The reports from the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes are already showing a return to normalcy. No more singing teacups, thankfully." Minerva's usual sternness was softened by genuine warmth. "Thank you, headmistress," Hermione replied, feeling a surge of affection for her former teacher. "It was quite an ordeal, and I couldn't have done it without your insights into the order." "You possess the brilliance and courage to act," Minerva corrected gently. "But tell me, what are your reflections on this whole disturbing affair? Beyond the immediate threat, what have you learned about such magic?" Hermione leaned forward. "I've come to understand that this isn't just about dark magic, headmistress. It's about control. The Order believed they were imposing a higher ethical standard on magic itself, forcing it into a balanced state. But in doing so, they created imbalance. They tried to dictate its very nature, rather than working with it." Minerva nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "A profound observation, Hermione. Many ancient magical traditions teach that true power comes from understanding and respecting magic's natural flow, its inherent unpredictability and wondrous chaos. To attempt to chain it, to force it into a rigid framework, is to invite disaster. The Echo Amulet was a testament to that hubris. It's like trying to make a river flow uphill because you believe that's the ethical direction," Hermione mused. "It will only create a destructive torrent." "Indeed," Minerva agreed. "The balance of magic is not something to be imposed by force or artifice. It is a delicate, organic thing, constantly adapting, constantly shifting. Those who seek to rigidly control it inevitably become consumed by it. And the consequences," Hermione added, "aren't just on the magical side. We saw how Muggle reality was impacted. It reinforces just how intertwined our worlds are, and how careful we must be." Minerva smiled faintly. "A lesson well learned, and a threat brilliantly neutralized. You have done the wizarding world a great service, Hermione. Perhaps you have even set a new standard for how we approach forbidden magic, not always with destruction, but with understanding." As the fluke connection fizzled out, Hermione sat back, a fresh sense of purpose settling over her. The Echo Amulet was secured, its immediate threat gone. But the conversation with Minerva and her own reflections brought a new realization. The singular artifact might be neutralized, but the Order of the Fractured Rune had reactivated it. They existed. Their ideology, their twisted quest for magical balance, still persisted. And Professor Vance had mentioned that the Echo Amulet was a system, a network of lesser amulets connected to the core. She had only encountered one fragment in Nocturne Alley. Where were the others? Had they been fully deactivated when the core artifact was neutralized, or did they retain a residual distorting effect? The threat wasn't entirely eradicated, it had merely been contained and understood. There were likely other hidden chambers, other caches, other members of the Order. The fight against those who sought to control magic, to twist its natural essence, was far from over. Hermione looked out her office window at the bustling, peaceful streets of London. Muggles walked below, oblivious to the magical complexities beneath their feet. Wizards went about their daily lives, trusting their spells would work as intended. It was a peace she had helped secure, but it was a fragile one. Her work wasn't done. The Echo Amulet was a victory, but it was also a stark reminder that the wizarding world held countless forgotten dangers, ancient beliefs that could resurface at any time. She had saved them from the artifact that warped spells, but the world was still full of mysteries, still full of other artifacts waiting to be discovered, understood, and potentially neutralized. There was always more to learn, always more to protect, and Hermione Granger, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was ready. The fight for the balance of magic had just truly begun.